Hello, so this is some brief thoughts on presenting quantitative data in a dissertational project. So, first of all, there's different ways you can structure your results and discussion. So you basically have two options. You can have a results section followed by a discussion, or a section that presents the results and discusses them at the same time. I tend to personally find that I find the latter easier, but I think sometimes students find separating out the results section from the discussion is easier. So it's kind of up to you what works for you. And to be honest, I would suggest you start writing it and work it out as you go along and then decide which route you're taking. So just so you understand, there is a difference between results and the discussion section. So results are basically easy to write. This is, what did you find out? What's the analysis told you? It's very concrete for quantitative data. So basically you're reporting facts. I've got the example there, and this is from a study that I was involved in a few years ago. 62% of visitors had a smartphone. But in the discussion, this is a so what, and this is actually harder to write. So Saunders, actually, the Saunders book, Research Methods for Business, has this useful list about what you might cover in your discussion. And it covers these four elements. So what meaning do these results have for my study, my organisation? So if you're doing, research for, say, for a company, for theory, for professional practice. So that's quite useful. So if you want to look at that, go and have a look at the Saunders book. I think I've referenced an old one there. I think it's 2000 and I can't remember. It's either 2018, 19 or 20 that we're on now. So basically your discussion is an interpretation of results. So it's a judgment on the facts. So it's not a kind of I think, but it's actually your explanation of what these facts that you found out mean for your study. So for example, in our case, if I just go back up there, the fact was 62% of visitors had a smartphone. The implication of that, the interpretation of that, was that smartphones are a resource commonly available to tourists. Now this was very important for our project because we were developing a smartphone app, and it would have been a bit pointless if most of the tourists didn't have a smartphone. So therefore, we were able to kind of conclude that. So the discussion is a bit harder. So I've given you quite a simple example, but it's actually quite hard. And this is where the critical thinking comes in. You need to think about what the results mean and where they're adding value to existing knowledge. So the various things you can do is you can acknowledge limitations in terms of actually perhaps not being able to establish something clearly. You can relate to literature in the field. So this is something which most of you will find easier to do. So for example, we go back to the fact about smartphones. One of the things we did was we linked it to the market research data available on number of people who had smartphones at the time, which broadly had a very similar percentage of people. So therefore we could sort of say that result reflected the population as a whole. Obviously more people have got smartphones now than they did sort of 10 years ago. But that was part of that, relating the literature in the field. And you can also discuss interrelated results from several questions. So don't just focus on, whether people had smartphones. We'd got other questions about, for instance, whether people were using social media. You can link some of these things together and interpret the data a bit more and discuss it further. So what we're trying to do with our data is tell a story, and you can either structure this by your research objectives or structure it by kind of key themes that need to be covered. And what I would say though is don't just write out your objectives again. So if your objective is to analyse sport volunteers' training needs, I wouldn't have that as your heading. I would have sport volunteer training needs, just simplify it. But you might think about having kind of key headings that capture the content basically. So use either your objectives to lead them or maybe themes that have become clear from the data analysis. So structure your story as well. So you want to provide some context setting at the background, and I've got an example in a moment, before you move on to the main body, which will have a number of subsections. And each subsection you want to, if you're presenting quantitative findings, you want to begin with the descriptive statistics first, so description of the main variables before you go into any statistical analysis. Okay, it's really annoying when students present some complex statistical analysis and I kind of think, I want to know how many people are aged over 50 first, so give them some of those basic facts first. So this is an example. So I'd begin with, that should say they should all be section 4 rather than some being section 4 and some being section 2. So 4.1, profile of respondents. So that would be my introduction context setting. So I might tell, I want to tell the reader who's answered my questionnaire. And then in what should be 4.2, it would be, I'd go on to perceptions of prestige. So maybe people have attended a prestigious sporting event, and I want to, they've answered some attitudinal questions to do perceptions of prestige. So I'll report the basic findings there first of all, so I might use just some descriptive statistics there. Then in the next section, 2.3, I want to look at respondent characteristics and perceptions of prestige. So I might divide this into a number of subsections, and I might look at age and prestige, gender and prestige, etc. And this is where I might go beyond the descriptive statistics and get into some of the inferential statistics. And then I might move on to another section, so maybe the events attended and perception of prestige, etc. So you're beginning to build this story. But what you don't want to do is jump in with a section on age and prestige before you've told me what the age range is of the respondents and what their general perceptions are of prestige in the first place, if that makes sense. You're going to use in quantitative research a lot of tables and figures, and these are often done very badly and often used inappropriately, so a pie chart with 20 categories, which is impossible for anyone to interpret. But if they're done well, they can add a lot of value, and they can be very visual if you're using figures, and if you're using tables, that gives you the detailed data presentation. So there is a difference between tables and figures. So tables, and I'll show you one in a moment, lay out data in a tabular format in columns and rows, and this is where we can actually present the numbers, and they can show links between items. What you don't want to do, a table is not just a load of text plonked into a box. Okay, that's what sometimes students do if they think they're going to run out of words in their dissertation. It's never a good idea. And figures are all your more visual material, so it could be graphs, it might be diagrams, could be photographs, anything like that. So here I've got an example of a table. This is quite a sophisticated table if we begin to look through this. So over on the left-hand side, these are basically tourist behaviour intention statements, and we've got 3 statements here. Now, first of all, I've grouped these according to whether they are generally agreed with, where they have a mean score of less than 3, or statements that are generally disagreed with. So I've got 2 statements that they agree with and 1 statement which they generally disagreed with. And then the next column, we put people into 3 groups, and it was to do with their awareness of climate change. So the first one is everybody, not 3 groups, put them into 2 groups. The first one is all, that's all respondents, and then the next 2 are whether they are aware of climate change or less aware of climate change. Okay, so we go down. So for each statement, we've got a row related to those groups. And then we report the mean and the standard deviation for everybody, the all, and also for the aware group and the less aware group. And then also we present, just the percentages in terms of the question answer options. So quite a bit of detail in there. So we've got the actual answers to the question overall, and then it comparing 2 groups. And then when we've compared the 2 groups, you can see that I've got some asterisks in there, and they are actually reporting the t-test results, so whether there was a significant difference at either the less than 0.05 level or the less 0.001 level. So we're beginning to sort of bring the statistics in there as well. So there's an awful lot wrapped up in that one table. So this is something that you need to kind of think about when you're constructing tables, is don't just do really basic things. Think about how you can pull data analysis from SPSS. So we use probably, I would think, quite a number of tables. So in SPSS, this would have probably panned out as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tables of data at least, or probably 7 8, 9, because it's got the mean. I'd have to have separate things for the mean and standard deviation. And then I've obviously got my statistical tests that I've had to pull through for this. So this comes from a lot of analysis in SPSS that I've pulled into one table. But it's a great table that tells the reader a lot. So we will look at this a little bit more in a face-to-face session in terms of doing writing ups. This will be, for those of you I see face-to-face, it'll be in session 6.